Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the incredible and, surprisingly messy origin story of ancient Athens. We're going to see how the cradle of democracy nearly tore itself apart before its golden age even got started. Okay, so when you think of ancient Greece, right, your mind probably goes straight to Athens. And for good reason. It was the A student of the ancient world. The home of philosophy, democracy, art, the whole shebang. But back then, the real heavyweight, the undisputed military superpower, was its big rival, Sparta. Well, the answer is kind of baked into its very foundations. See, the story of how Athens went from just a bunch of tribes to this dominant power, well, it's a wild tale of heroes, some really fatal flaws, and a society pushed right to the absolute brink of collapse. And it all kicks off with a mythical founder. All right, so the first major player we need to talk about is this guy, Theseus. Now, you might know him as a mythological hero, but his most important legacy was actually political. He's the one who gets the credit for uniting all these scattered, warring tribes in the region of Attica into a single, cohesive city-state, what the Greeks called a polis. Yeah, he's famous for slaying the Minotaur in the myths, but his real, lasting legacy was creating the state of Athens itself. And it's crazy how deep his story runs in our culture even today. The name of the Aegean Sea, the word labyrinth, even a super famous philosophical puzzle about identity, the Ship of Theseus, yep, they all trace right back to his myth. Now this is the really crucial move Theseus made. Instead of setting himself up as some all-powerful king, he established an aristocracy. So power wasn't held by just one guy, it was shared among a council of elite, land-owning families who were all connected by blood and marriage. But, and this is a big but, this system, built on family ties and private land, had a catastrophic flaw baked right into its DNA. By concentrating both power and wealth in the hands of a few interconnected families, it created this vicious cycle of debt that would slowly but surely strangle the very city it was supposed to unite. So to really get how this worked, just imagine two farmers. Let's say they start out with the same amount of land, but one year there's a really bad harvest. And the first farmer has no savings. He's forced to borrow from his more successful neighbor. Well, when he can't pay that loan back, his neighbor takes his land as payment. And with no land, no options, his last resort is to sell himself and his family into slavery, just to survive. And let me be clear, this was not just a story. This was the grim reality for thousands of Athenian citizens. It's such a stark contrast to Sparta, where they only enslaved people they conquered. In Athens, your neighbor could literally become your master. Citizens were enslaving other citizens. You can just imagine the social fabric ripping apart at the seams. So, society was teetering on the edge of a full-blown revolt, especially after a failed coup attempt really rattled the elite. They knew they had to do something. And that's when a nobleman named Draco stepped forward, claiming he had the solution to fix everything. Draco's diagnosis was simple and completely wrong. He basically thought the problem wasn't the crushing poverty and debt. No, it was that people weren't afraid enough of the law. His solution? A new legal code so severe that even the smallest crimes were punishable by death. Steal a bunch of grapes? That could get you executed. His laws were, quite literally, draconian.
But here's the thing. Behind all the brutal punishments, Draco's reform was actually this brilliant political move, a total power grab disguised as justice. He rolled out this simple three-step system. First, he made it a rule that all disputes had to be settled in the courts. Okay. Second, he made the city's ancient high court, the Areopagus Council, the ultimate authority on everything. And then the third step. This was the masterstroke. He made sure that only members of the aristocracy could serve on that council.
And just like that, in one move, he put all legal power squarely into the hands of his fellow nobles. They could now interpret any law, settle any dispute, and hand down any verdict in a way that benefited them. The law wasn't a shield for the weak anymore, it was a club for the powerful. So far from fixing anything, Draco's laws basically just poured gasoline on the fire. The rich nobles used the courts to legally strip the poor of their land and their freedom. And that gap between the haves and the have-nots, it didn't just grow, it became this massive, unbridgeable chasm. The whole city was primed for a violent peasant uprising. I mean, all the ingredients were there. Widespread debt, systemic injustice, and a huge part of the population with absolutely nothing left to lose. It seemed totally, completely inevitable that Athens was about to drown itself in a bloody civil war. But the explosion never came. The revolution just never happened. So how did Athens pull itself back from the brink of total self-destruction? And who was the remarkable statesman who made it possible? Well, that's a story for our next explainer.